Welcome, everybody. Gerald Brown. And welcome once again. Another episode of Heavy in the Paint. Gerald Brown here. Rick Mahorn. He's on the mend. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button and we'll get you caught up on everything associated in NBA, the world of sports, MLB, NFL, CFB, CBB. Joining me right now, gentleman does an outstanding job covering the Golden State Warriors, the ins and outs, all associated with them, Mr. Danny Emerman of the Bay Area News Group. Danny, I'll start right off with the fact is that you look at this recent road trip that the Golden State Warriors went on. What has been kind of the feeling in with the coaching staff and around the team after some wins and really some bad losses, if you look at that Toronto loss, if you will?
Yeah, the Toronto loss in particular was really deflating for the players and coaches. It was about as dire as I've seen it this year. Generally, even through the ups and downs, things have been pretty positive in the locker room, behind the scenes this year. The Toronto game was a pretty brutal loss, though. You know, it was a game they should have won. They were up in the fourth quarter. They're playing a team that had 8 wins at the time, and Toronto's starting to play a little bit better. They just beat Boston the other day, but that was a game that they circled as one that they had to get. It was nice to see them bounce back in Minnesota a couple nights later, and for as dire as things felt in Toronto, they were really thrilled with that loss, with that win. Sorry. And if you watched ESPN or were on social media at all this past week, those 2 games, you kind of saw them pop off a little bit. You saw Draymond's comments about not mortgaging the future. Steph and Steve talked after both those games about pretty high-level, big-picture stuff with the direction of the franchise, the end of a dynasty. So this past week, this road trip was certainly an inflection point in the season, and it's one that I'll remember for sure.
Yeah, Danny, when you look at this team, and right now, they're about 500, and they go on this road trip we alluded to, and then they come back home. They got some games against, they got the world champs coming in on Monday, but then after that, they play a hot Sacramento Kings team, and then they have the Bulls, Lakers, Utah, and hot Oklahoma City, followed by Phoenix, Orlando, and Utah. Are we starting to see the inevitable, which is the transition of that championship caliber team into a team that is starting the rebuilding process?
We've started to see a transition these past few years, but it's not necessarily one from a championship team to a rebuilding one. It's one from a championship team to a mediocre one. And as you know, like in the NBA, it's where you don't want to be. You don't want to be in the middle. You're going to be drafting 16 through 20. You're going to be in the play-in round. And that's where this team has been for the past couple of years. They're playing 500 ball again. It seems like another trade deadline is going to come and go without any major reinforcements. As far as I can tell, that could always change. But this has been kind of the company line for them. They have this roster flexibility that they want to use at the deadline. And then the deadline comes and they don't find any deals. They'll say, hey, we'll have a lot of flexibility in the summer. And then nothing really happens. And they have a lot of optionality. And then, they kind of like their young guys again. So they're in the middle place. They're between eras. And the biggest concerning thing for me is that the next era, the Jonathan Kuminga, the Brandon Pajemski, Trace Jackson Davis, young core, they haven't really proven much at all, just in terms of being winning players, being impactful on a night-to-night basis. And they're all still young, and they can change that. But if we're talking about passing the baton, that's just not really an option at this moment.
Yeah. When you look at this team and, some of the moves that kind of, will allude and let you know the direction that the franchise might be going. It was kind of a head scratcher not to re-sign or even try to sign and come to an agreement with Jonathan Kuminga, but yet they re-signed Moses Moody and stuff. And when having Moody, it's already the inevitable of thinking that Kuminga was going to be a young player that they were going to move. when you look at the dynamic now of Kuminga, what has been kind of his feeling around this team? Is he kind of in a sense thinking that his time might be very limited with the Warriors?
I don't think so, and I think he'll be a player who stays on the team after this deadline. I think he'll be a Warrior for the rest of the year at the very least. In terms of his contract negotiations, the two sides this summer weren't super close to coming to an agreement. From my understanding, Minga and his camp were not hard lined at a maximum contract like some of his draft class contemporaries got. But I think the Warriors had in mind that they could maybe get him on a bit of a bargain. The Kuminga camp was not into that. I think they were pretty far apart, maybe 10 million-ish on an annual basis apart on a deal. And the Warriors wanted to see what he could do this season before deciding, hey, are we going to actually pay this guy $30-40 million a year? And before his current, significant ankle sprain, he was turning a corner. He was playing the best basketball of his career, back-to-back 34-point games, was much more forceful on defense. He was really committing to rebounding, which is all the things that Steve Kerr and the coaching staff have wanted him to do all this time. They know he can score, but they want him to do all the little things. And he was starting to do that. So his injury came at a really inopportune time. But I think the Warriors are thrilled with the way he was playing before that and optimistic that when he gets back from this ankle sprain around the trade deadline, he'll continue that.
Yeah. Danny, I had a friend of mine, BJ Armstrong, he still is a friend of mine, but BJ said something to me which really, really has resonated with me. He said, and obviously he was the agent at one time for Draymond Green and really, having a part of, being a part of that Warriors dynasty. He says, championship dynasties don't end well. They don't. And I was like, no, you got to be wrong. You haven't really. And he said, you think about it, obviously, with the Lakers deciding to move on from Shaq, the Celtics and stuff like that with Bird and those guys getting older, the Bulls, deciding to break up their team. And you're looking at this dynasty right now, the Golden State Warriors. I thought it would have started in terms of obviously when Klay Thompson was obviously decided to sign elsewhere. How difficult is this with the fan base in terms of the reality that, they're going to perhaps either, that time has come and gone. How has that process been from your perspective in terms of this fan base embracing that, hey, we got to restart this whole thing all over again?
Oh, the fan base is not there yet. Not even close. And I don't blame them. When you still see Steph Curry playing the way he is, I completely understand fans wanting them to go all in on right now. And I think there's a compelling argument that they should do everything they can to maximize this year, next year, maybe the year after, like Steph's last 2 or 3 seasons, either in this league or at this level, and put as many good players around him as they can. The fans are very frustrated that the Warriors haven't been able to do that and that they are intent on holding on to their future assets, whether it be Kuminga or some of their future first-round picks. It's also just easier as a fan to say, hey, we got to go get this guy or that guy, and who cares what we give up? The fans aren't always privy to as much information as the team is, as Steph Curry is. These other teams who these fans want to take their stars from, they don't always want to trade their stars. They don't always want to deal with the Warriors. They don't always like what the Warriors have to offer. There's a lot of factors out there. But no, the fans are definitely not, content with fading into the distance. They don't really want a farewell tour, it doesn't seem like. And nor should they. Like, Steph is still averaging 24 a game, shooting 50%. He's playing awesome, and he deserves to make another run at it if the Warriors can get their stuff together and put, an actual team around him.
Yeah, I will say that whenever that day comes, I think, the ownership group of the Golden State Warriors, should really be embraced and acknowledged for all the great things they did. Look, they've gone in the luxury tax hell, yeah, every year, and they have really put the sort of monies into it, but inevitably the end is going to come.
Yeah.
And yet, when you saw Bob Myers leave, that was kind of an indication that, hey, this run might be over. Draymond Green is obviously that other linchpin that's around. If we get to a point this trade deadline and you look at the limited moves that are made, I mean, good. You know, you hear the name of Nikola Vucevic perhaps being, you know, a guy that's sought after. But if they have minimal moves this trade deadline, what will that tell us, in your opinion, about this team and really, you know, what should the message be for fans?
I think the message for fans and internally, if they don't make very many moves at the deadline, would be, hey, you know, look at the Western Conference. We're four games back of the 4 seed. You know, everyone's bunched up, and all it takes is an 8-2 stretch, and we're right back in it. And I buy that, you know, to some degree. They started the season 12-3, so you know they have something like that in them. I'm just skeptical with the way they've played the past month and a half, 8 weeks, that they could actually put together a stretch like that. But yeah, if they don't do anything this deadline, I think it's, you know, encouraging the internal players on the team and saying, hey, you guys, we believe in you. You guys can go do this. One move that I do think is possible, I'm not reporting this, but I do think it's possible that if at the deadline they decide to dip under the luxury tax this year, they could trade away one of their veterans. That would be a sign and a signal.
Draymond?
Not Draymond. I think there's 5 or 6 million over the luxury tax right now. So if they got rid of a contract like a Gary Payton or a Kyle Anderson, they would probably have to attach draft capital to either, but they could dip under the luxury tax. And to me, that would signal that, hey, like, ownership has paid the luxury tax a lot this century, this run. They don't really want to do it again for a team that they don't think can win the championship. And that would be reasonable. Most teams operate that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. And you know, Danny, I just looked at the way that this has been played out, and you know that the All-Star game is in the Bay Areas. You know, the Warriors and Steph Curry is, you know, obviously he's going to be the host of the All-Star game. And I can only think of perhaps maybe when the Orlando Magic, you know, they had it in Florida and obviously in Orlando, and Dwight Howard got traded right before that All-Star game. It wasn't a good feeling. But when you look at the way this thing goes out, and I tell you this, the tea leaves are there. How surprised would you be if Steph Curry, quietly behind the scenes, a la Kevin Garnett, went to management after this season is over and say, hey, you know what? I really would like to play for another championship somewhere again, where again we can help out both each other. How surprised would you be if that was the something that's transpired? Because he said some interesting things when he signed the extension and wanting to play at that elite level, which he's still playing, coming off the Olympics, and yet the surrounding parts are not there, and they can't afford to continue just to pay the luxury tax and the aprons and go over them. How surprised would you be if quietly Steph Curry said in the offseason he asked for a trade?
I would be very surprised if Steph Curry asked for a trade. I would be less surprised if he didn't sign that contract extension, because this is something that has been going on for years, since the 2022 title, just in terms of them being in the middle, them being unable to bring in a second star. He knew all of that going into the season when he decided to ink that deal. So to me, that represents trust in the front office to actually get something done. It's an example of him valuing being with one franchise for his entire career. I do think that matters to him a lot. I think last year in Dallas, they were playing a game against the Mavericks, and he noticed, Dirk and how he was treated and how he was sitting courtside and at. he's treated like royalty over there, and he spent his whole career with Dallas. I think that is something that appeals to him. So I would be very surprised. That being said, crazy things happen in this league. And, if Steph's number one priority is to win a fifth championship, which is something he definitely wants to do, he wants to match Kobe Bryant and some of those other guys with 5 titles. If that's his number one priority, the easiest way to do that probably wouldn't be in Golden State.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Oklahoma City is only going to get better and better. Houston is a team that's going to come up. You look at the sort of shift, and I mean, if you look at a situation where I'd already mapped it out, I said, look, the Orlando Magic have been looking for perimeter shooting. If you are able to swing a deal, and they have a lot of young talent, they have really drafted very well. You are able to move Steph Curry and get young talent. Now it's a win-win situation for both parties. But when you think about Steph Curry, obviously Draymond Green, is it kind of in a sense that those two guys are tied at the hip, that as long as Steph Curry stays in with the Warriors, that Draymond would also as well?
Think about all of the times in the past 10 years, maybe even especially the past 2-3 years, where the Warriors kind of had to make a decision on Draymond one way or another. And they've always stuck with him through suspensions, through punching a teammate, through on-court behavioral issues. They've always stuck with him. I think that says a lot about what Steph Curry values and what Steph Curry thinks about Draymond Green. The Warriors don't make decisions like that without talking to Steph. So I think that connection is pretty ironclad. And yeah, I would consider them, attached. And Draymond, similarly, like Steph, values being on one team his entire career. He had a chance to leave. He almost went to Memphis as a free agent, but he decided to stay. And I would be surprised to see Draymond in another uniform as well.
Yeah. Last one before I let you get on out of here, Danny. When you look at Steve Kerr, and obviously this is right around the anniversary of the passing of the assistant coach that was so beloved by that Warriors team, and just hearing obviously Steve Kerr reflection on the coach and stuff. Do you get a sense in terms of the energy and stuff from Steve Kerr that obviously if they go in a different direction, and that's why I said there's so much to be told about this season in terms of, with Steph, what they do with trade deadline. Could you foresee how much, what is the vibe and stuff that you get from Steve Kerr? And is it still something that, again, you could perhaps maybe see him also hanging around as they sort of transition differently from that sort of championship team, try to rebuild again?
Yeah, I think Steve has talked about this publicly in terms of his desire to coach and how long he wants to coach. I would be surprised if Steve coached much longer after Steph and Draymond are done. Mm-hmm. Steve's had a fantastic career as a player, as an announcer, as an executive, as a 4-time champion, as a head coach. He doesn't have anything to prove, but he does love Steph Curry. He loves Draymond Green. I imagine after they're gone, I think would probably be a time where he would probably reassess things in his career and his life. But that is 3, 4, 5 years down the road at this point. And I think Steve is the second longest tenured coach in the league. Is that right? Maybe Spoelstra might be longer than him too.
Yeah, Spoelstra, I believe, is Popovich. I think Pop would be Pop, then Spoelstra, and then Kerr.
And then Steve.
Yeah, Kerr would be right behind him. Last one before I let you get on out of here. When you look at the Warriors and stuff and playing a game of what if James Wiseman would have developed into this, obviously the lottery pick and stuff, where do you think the Warriors would be right now? What would the conversation be like if James Wiseman had developed into the lottery pick and obviously the expectation that was attached to him?
I don't even think they needed him to develop into what they thought he could be. I think even if he just stayed healthy and was like an average player, everything would be different. He obviously didn't pan out, for a lot of different reasons, and it wasn't pretty. Even before the injuries, he had some struggles on the court. But if you watch his like rookie year highlights when the team was really bad and he was getting a lot of opportunities, you could see flashes. He was hitting threes and blocking people at the rim, running the floor, finishing. Like, if he could do those things, like those tools would carry the day. And he's kind of exactly what they need. They've never had a stretch five who's 6'11", 7 feet tall, who would open things up for Steph, open things up for a guy like Kuminga to slash. I think things would be very different if James Wiseman had stayed healthy and panned out. There would be some interesting like domino effects of that, just in terms of like roster building. But yeah, I mean, they had really high hopes of James Wiseman in 2020, and every team has misses, but he was supposed to be the linchpin of the second timeline, right? He was kind of the impetus for the infamous 2-timeline plan, because they had this championship dynasty team and the rare opportunity to pick second in an NBA draft and have these young players headlined by the number 2 pick in the draft come in and usher in a new era as the old guard fades out. And that just hasn't panned out at all. And they won the 2022 title while they were technically trying to do that, but none of the young guys really contributed much at all in that title run. They kind of won that championship in spite of a 2-timeline plan and ran with it as if it was a huge part of it. I think that was a big mistake.
Yeah. Danny, listen, man, really, really appreciate your time as always, man. Definitely look forward to doing this again. All the best. Enjoy this weekend, and really appreciate you giving tremendous insight on the Golden State Warriors and this season and the run that they're on, and hopefully seeing how it all pans out.
Thanks, Gerald. I appreciate it. Hey, next time we'll have to do it with Rick too.
Yes. Once Rick is on the men, definitely gonna make sure we make that happen.
All right. All the best to you and Rick. Thanks.
Okay, my pleasure. Danny Emerman of the Bear News Group joining me here in Heavy in the Paint.